What's up, everyone? We are back for another episode of the Pair Program. I'm your host, Tim Winkler, accompanied by my podcast co-host, Mike Gruen. Mike, what's going on?
How you doing?
I'm good. I was reading an article this morning. You ever driven in a Tesla before?
Yes.
Okay. So they don't quite have the self-driving function down yet, but it's something that they're working on in beta. And they rolled out a commercial or a YouTube video from one of the owner investors, released a video of them driving their Model 3 towards one of their children on like a San Francisco road. It was going slow, of course, but it shows the car like slowing down, not hitting his kid. It got pulled pretty quickly off YouTube. They're like, you can't allow content showing a minor participating in dangerous activities. I was like, give them maybe a thumbs up for the effort, but not the best.
Actually, I don't know, because now we're talking about it, aren't we? So Streisand effect in effect. Yeah, so there you go.
True. That's true. Cool. Well, let's give the listeners a little heads up on today's episode. I am excited for this one. So we're calling it From FAANG to Founder. And it's a discussion that could go down a few different paths. For example, startups and big tech, of course, they have very different work environments. There's pros and cons to each. But for this episode specifically, I want to look at this from the founder's perspective. Both of our guests are current startup founders. They both have experiences working for FAANG companies like Google, Facebook. And we thought it'd be interesting to kind of hear it from them on, what translates over as helpful or maybe not so helpful when you're kind of launching your own startup. So I want to thank our two guests for joining us today. So I give David, thank you for spending time with us on the Pair Program.
Thank you for having us.
Good stuff. All right. So let's dive in real quick to our first segment called Pair Me Up. Here's where we'll go around the room, shout out a complimentary pairing. Mike, you always start us off. So go ahead and kick it off.
Going back to food, it's been a little while since I've done a food one. So like purely food one. So Nutella and Nilla wafers. My kids and I hit upon this last weekend. We were watching TV and wanted a quick snack, and I have to say it went really well together. Made little sandwiches. They were like a Milano cookie almost, but Nutella and vanilla. So definitely good.
Nutella's underrated. I think it's so good in like croissants or.
Is it underrated? I feel like it's such an amazing food group that it's hard to believe anyone would underrate it.
Maybe it's underappreciated. Maybe it doesn't have the
underappreciated. Yeah. I never see it in somebody's like cabinets or anything. Whenever I go over, I'm like, it was big when I lived in Asia. It was a big thing, but I haven't seen it too much around here.
Well, you'll have to come by here and you'll see some Nutella in our cabinets for sure.
Just fully stocked Nutella. Just Costco runs. Good stuff. All right, I'll jump in. So my pairing is back to school and new gear. So it's that time of year where kids are going back to school. They need that new swag. I think back to when summer's wrapping up, my mom would always take me to the mall and we'd get like a new backpack and then a new outfit. And I'll never forget, she once teed me up with like a sweatsuit that was all same colored top and bottoms. One was all red, and then we got one that was all green. It's like third or fourth grade or something. And, I looked back at some of the pictures and I had to wonder like kind of form of punishment she was putting me through. Going into school looking like Ronald McDonald. But I'd say back to school and new gear is always something that I would associate with this time of year in the summer.
Pairing, yeah.
Cool. Let's toss it over to our guest. So if you want to give us a quick intro and then tell us your pairing, and then we'll kick it to David.
Sure. So I'm Sagiv, the founder of FlipLab. It's a company we started 7 months ago. It's a developer tools company that offer SDKs for companies' APIs. We auto-generate SDKs from whatever API you have internally. Before that, on the FAANG side, I actually worked in two different FAANG companies. One was Facebook and one was Amazon, and we will talk about it in a second. In terms of pairing, I would say morning walk paired with audiobooks. I'm a huge for me, I read really slow, but I listen really fast. So like always double the speed, but like combined with like a morning walk, especially for people who work from home, that's a way to kind of start your day and like you used to walk to your office or commute to your office. So for me, that's the barrier between home and work. So when I come back from the walk, it's like I start working, but in between I just listen to some audiobooks. So yeah, that would be my pair.
Very nice.
That's a good one. Yeah, once the company went remote, right? The world went remote. I lost that commuting ability to listen to like my podcast. So trying to find times throughout the day to plug in those little audio sessions is tricky. Morning walks are a good one.
Washing dishes will be another chance for you.
Washing dishes, good call. Cool, David. How about yourself? Quick intro on your pairing.
Yeah, it's funny because I actually I volunteer to walk the dog at night so I can listen to an audiobook. So we're pretty aligned there. But the evening walks. So yeah, I'm Dave Yaffe. I run a company called Estuary. We are a real-time data company. We believe it's way too hard to use real-time data such that everyone believes, that they don't need it, when in fact it's actually a super valuable thing. It just has to be a lot simpler than the world makes it right now. We got on this journey from a few other, myself and my co-founder, we've worked together for a number of years. We actually had done a company called Invite Media together, which got bought by Google. I was at Google for about 5 years. And then we had done another company called Arbor, which got bought by a non-FAANG, and I was there for a while too, a company called LiveRamp. And now we're here. And my pairing is, they don't have to be good, right? They can be a bad pairing.
They can be whatever you want.
All right.
Sure. Yeah.
So pairing is actually behind me. It's puppies and eating your couch. So that's why there's a blanket over my couch right now. It's because our puppy ate that couch a while ago and I need to get a new one.
There you go.
What kind of puppy are you working with?
It's she's a golden retriever pit bull mix. So a pretty unusual puppy.
Yeah. Yeah, we've gotten a pretty used to call it dog proofing most furniture in our house, just because every piece of furniture is covered with a blanket or some sort of a cloth, just because it's either an accident or it's like a scratch or a bite or something. But I completely relate to you.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We really liked this one. It's a futon, I'll have to get a new one.
There you go.
Cool. Well, let's dive in. I want to make the most of our time that we've got with you all. And so, yeah, like I mentioned, we're discussing, FAANG to founder and, to make the most of our time. And you guys kind of alluded to it briefly. Maybe we can expand on it quickly as well. As, David, let's start with you. You started in bigger companies. Your current role as co-founder of Estuary. Talk to us a little bit about that journey, and then maybe some things that stand out to you as you're making those transitions from starting something up, coming from bigger environments.
Yeah, I think, my earliest thing in my career was actually Boeing. So that's a huge company. And I kind of just I flip-flopped every time I did something. So I went from, Boeing to a startup, and then we got bought by Yahoo. Another startup got bought by Google. Another startup got bought by LiveRamp. And that means that you kind of just change the way that, you're working, and you learn a lot along the way. Startups tend to have an environment that I enjoy personally working in, such that it's easier to get stuff done a lot of the times. It's easier to affect change and affect big decisions. Kind of the easy things are easy in a startup and the hard things are hard in a startup. Whereas a big company like Google, the easy things are hard and the hard things are easy. And, Google's a really good example of a place where you can solve the most technically complicated problems in like no time with no effort. But, getting decisions made and getting people aligned around a course of action can be pretty difficult. So I think, for me, it's been flipping back and forth a little bit between those. And when you get tired of one environment, you kind of move to the other one. But there's things you learn from both of them, right? Like I think my time at a large company like Google, it was really valuable for taking things that I wanted to ensure that were part of our companies now, and using them the correct amount. Some things like, I don't want to get too far into it, but some things like OKRs, for instance, are a pretty interesting thing where they're somewhat valuable and also somewhat very invaluable for small companies. And so using the right tools that they provide and using them thoughtfully is important, I think.
What was your, I guess, motivation for getting into startup world? Was it something in your background where your family that was entrepreneurial? Was there anything that specifically drew you in?
I was a mechanical engineer when I started. And being a mechanical engineer in New York City, there are unique opportunities there. I ended up going to Seattle and working for Boeing, and that was a great experience. I really enjoyed it, but I felt a bit like a commodity. And for me, getting into startups started right after that, where I wanted to get away. I wanted to be part of something that I felt like I was really able to affect change within an organization and have a big impact. So I ended up going to a company called Right Media, which was a later stage startup in New York. It was one of the earlier ones in 2007. So that was really the reason. And that experience was so good that it led me to always kind of search for one and go back to it.
Cool. Yeah. So your background, studying your profile, you've done a lot of startup work before you joined, moved into the FAANG world. Maybe talk us through that, and what was your incentive or why you wanted to take that switch from startup into FAANG.
Yeah, a lot of selfish reasons, and I'll say why in a second. But I have really strong opinions that you actually should not start your career in big companies. This is where you go to end your career. It's a great place to retire. Like every time that I get like young people who just start their career asking me like, where should I go? Should I go to whatever, Facebook and all those big corps, or should I go to startups? My recommendation is always go to startups, because this is where you'll have the chance to learn the most. You'll always also have the chance to fail the most, but like depends what your motivation. And I think the question is really what is your motivation to decide what you want to do next, right? So I started in startups because this is where I felt belonged at the beginning. But after starting a few companies, I realized that I don't have enough skill set to develop big companies, right? So I decided to join all those like Facebook and Amazon to see like how the best companies in the world really operate. In terms of processes, in terms of scale, in terms of like hiring people and pretty much everything in between. Because all you have, if you don't have this kind of perspective, all you know is whatever you learn in the startup, which is not a lot in terms of processes, right? Startups are notoriously known for not having process. And process comes with scale usually. So I felt like I always miss this point of like how you scale a company, how a big company operates, what is HR, right? Like what is performance review, like how those things actually like act. So I always knew that I want to go back to be a founder and go back to start a company, but I didn't feel that I have enough tools in my position to make those companies really big, above certain size, right? So I decided to take a break, join all those kind of big, well-known corporations to see how they run things. Anything from hiring to firing to performance reviews to managing other people, to email communication and everything that you can probably learn in corporations. And all my tenure there, I knew that I'm going to go back to startups. So I try to learn as much as possible and kind of read from their book so I can kind of implement it in my book later on. I guess it depends what your motivation. If your motivation is just paycheck, you should probably stay in all those big corporations. If your motivation is whatever impact or on your own destiny, you should probably think about startups.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say that like people ask me for advice, and it does depend. I give usually the same advice of going to a startup, but I think there are some people who, if you just want like a nice stable job and whatever, like that sort of a schedule, then maybe startups aren't for you. And, you have to be comfortable with constant change and just a lot of the stuff that comes with being a startup. But at the same time, you do get exposed to so much. And I think that a lot of people starting out in their career don't realize, like, going to a startup, the breadth of like things that you get to interact with and how helpful that can be in you figuring out what you want to do over the long haul. Get exposed to so much. Whereas if you go to a large company, you usually have a much more narrow view of the world in terms of what your job is day in and day out.
Yeah, motivation plays a huge role on what you want to accomplish, right? If you want to increase your paycheck or your compensation, you better stay in FAANG, right? They pay the most. You have 100% chance to have a fat paycheck. Versus in startups, you have like maybe 1% chance to have a really big exit, or maybe 0.01% to have really large exit, and all the rest probably you're going to fail, right? So if compensation is your first kind of priority, stay in FAANG. If work-life balance is your first priority, definitely stay in FAANG, right? Like you can work really easily there. You'll have the 9 to 5. Nobody betters you on weekends. Again, it depends based on teams, but usually that's the case. Versus in startups, you're probably going to work a lot, right? Especially if you're the founder. There is no 9 to 5 if you're a founder of a startup. So ask yourself really, what is your motivation? Is it just an ego trip? Do you want to just like control other people? Well, you can do it in FAANG, you can do it in startups. It doesn't really matter. So look, what is the real motivation? Are you super passionate about some field, right? And you can find a job there. So maybe startups is your place, right? Start a company around that. Do you like leading and managing other people? You can do it in FAANG, you can do it in startups. So I guess I would start by asking what are you optimizing for, and go from there.
Yeah, I remember when I was leaving Google, I was talking to a few people, and I was thinking about going to a startup and joining one. And so one of the people I spoke with was an engineering manager at Google, and he basically said, unless you start your own startup, there is just no monetary reason that you would ever, leave Google to go to another startup. And running the numbers, it is absolutely true. So 100% agree with you. It's kind of like you have to be a little bit crazy to go and start a startup or to join a startup, but there are really good reasons, like the work environment, the ability to learn tons of stuff and take on lots of hats and responsibilities. Those can kind of serve you later to know, what it's like to actually run a company end to end, a lot more than you would ever get working at a big company where you're kind of just focused on one task over and over. So what I really like about startups is actually that core ability, right? Like my job is never the same throughout like the life of a startup. It stays the same for like 2-month increments, and then I have to find someone who's better than me at that task, hire them, and have them do that task. And that's kind of like the mark of a successful startup if you can do that.
What's the size of Estuary?
So we're 12. Yeah, we're 12 people right now, so pretty small. The last startup that I ran, we scaled to about 35 people before we sold it. The previous one was about 45.
And so, Guy, how big is LibLab?
Yeah, so we're very small as well, similar size, I'll say. Again, the company is very, very new, only 7 months old. And again, that's a huge contrast to like leading 70 or 80 people that I had in Amazon, right? So for me, it was less about the size of or the number of people that I manage, and more about the impact, owning your destiny, being passionate about what you're doing. And pretty much like Dave said before, like the fact that your job changes every month or two based on whatever is needed to make the company successful. Those are things that I'm super kind of happy to do.
Were there things that, you said you joined to learn certain areas, kind of observe some other departments? Were there things that you realized that you don't want to bring into your business as it scales?
Well, too much of a process, right? Like there is a fine line between process that makes the company more efficient, move forward, kind of standardize things, versus like when you start slowing down, right? So like where you draw the line, it's super important. Obviously, when you're Google size, like you have to have all those processes in place, but by definition, you'll have to move that slow, right? So you don't want to bring all the tools that you have in Google or Facebook into a small 10 people company from one hand, but you probably want to take some notes on like how you do performance reviews, right? How you set OKRs. Like you can take a lot of really good things that those companies operates by and bring it. So it's really up to you as a founder to decide what you want to bring to your company. But the things that help me the most is like how you hire the right people, how you measure success, how you help talent to kind of progress in their career, and Those are the things that I really enjoyed learning in all those big established companies that have clear process for that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because that's a common conversation I have. I've worked mostly in startups, and it's a common conversation. Is like looking at like, oh well, Google does this and Amazon does that. It's like, well, but we're not Google or Amazon. Like those processes don't scale down. Like that's like we're too small to do all of that, and we don't have the people necessary to make that work. And it's like you sort of look at what those companies do. It's good to have it as a goal. I tend to agree with you, but like you have to look and pick and choose. And you mentioned OKRs. I wanted to get back to Dave's point about OKRs because he mentioned it, because I've definitely seen them be destructive. Like setting the wrong goals can be very destructive. And I want to sort of pull on that thread if you don't mind. Back to your point about OKRs. Sorry, Dave. Yeah, Dave, because you had mentioned it. Sorry, in the very intro.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with OKRs as a startup is they're quarterly, by definition, right? It's something that you do at a quarterly time period, which is like an extremely long startup time period. And throughout that quarter, your goals might change. So depending on where you are, right? Like startups span series seed companies to series, C or D companies, and those OKRs start to make a lot more sense as you get further down that path. And I do overall appreciate having data-driven metrics that you're tracking and driving your organization around. I think that's absolutely important. We should all be looking at dashboards, and we should know exactly what we're trying to optimize for. And our team should do that, and we should know how we personally are going to affect that change. But the difficult thing with an OKR specifically is the time scale. So if you can kind of take that and adapt it to a shorter time scale to your team, and then it's a lot more useful, I think. And I also would say that just to go back to the initial question that you asked, Sagiv, my thing that I saw and I really did not want to, I'm now allergic to is just politics. No matter what, a big organization has lots of politics, and they tend to just slow the organization down. It tends to get people focused on the wrong things. And that can be, politics around performance reviews, politics around that stuff. I really do like some of the methods that come out of performance reviews by Google and other big companies, but not as long as they're not contributing to internal politics.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say even in FAANG companies, I saw a huge difference between Facebook and Amazon, how you evaluate people, how you do the performance reviews, right? I think there is a spectrum between, I was working in one startup back in the days that I never talked to my boss about performance. Like I had no idea if I'm doing well or bad. We didn't even have one-on-one, right? On the other end of the spectrum, as a manager in Facebook, I used to have twice a year performance review, twice a year mid-cycle review. So pretty much every quarter I used to have kind of semi-performance review with my engineers back in the days, which was way too much, I think. So like where you want to be, probably somewhere in the middle, but it's really up to you. But it's really important to get different perspective and kind of different cultures, and then decide whatever culture you want to implement for your company.
When you guys are hiring, because I've talked to a number of founders, kind of sourcing speakers for this topic, and some of the themes that come up is, one of the biggest value props of working with one of these large organizations is the network that you build, and how that impacts different parts of your venture. So if that's from hiring, if it's from capital or connections with venture capital, what is it that you have seen as maybe some of the areas that have been most impactful in your business in terms of for hiring as an example, right? Are there certain departments that you would say, oh yeah, this is great to have this engineer from Google or Facebook or what have you, but when I'm looking to hire somebody on product marketing, I want somebody who's very specific to maybe my vertical or maybe to this stage of my product. Have you seen any specific departments where it's good to kind of tap folks that have that are coming from these bigger environments versus it's really not as relevant?
I think I'm pretty opinionated on this. I think people at Google get so highly compensated that it's very difficult to bring them over to a startup. And that applies to all of the FAANG companies. And most of the time it's not worth it, right? Like it's just not worth trying to bring them over unless they really care about equity and they want to have that journey and they're excited to like, they need that in their lives. Like startup people need to be in a startup. And that's how you can lure someone over from a FAANG, except for 2 people, I think. And all of my career, I haven't really drawn on my Google network to actually do hiring. And those 2 hires were amazing. I'd hire them again. They actually ended up doing better than they would have at Google, which is, very surprising, but that's not the case for the most part. That's not what you should be expecting. So I think it's the network is good. It opens some doors, especially since other Google people go to other organizations and you'll end up knowing them and being able to potentially work with them and other business models. But for me personally, hiring is probably not the one.
I couldn't agree more. So there are 2 aspects here, right? For you as a manager, I think as a founder, right, it's much, much harder to recruit people to your company, to unnamed company versus hiring for Google or Facebook or whatever, like big name FAANG company, right? It's much harder because nobody heard about you. 1, you cannot pay as much as the big companies too. And let's convince people to kind of take a risk on whatever you decided to take a risk. That's not an easy job. So as a founder, you're going to have hard life coming from FAANG, especially as a person who hired for FAANG before. Like it's a whole new level of skill set that you need to develop, how you approach and find those talents without having hundreds of recruiters behind you, right? But I think to the point that Dave said before, which I couldn't agree more, I had really bad experience hiring people who came from FAANG companies. They're just by definition, if you're in startup, you have to be hungry, right? Whatever the hunger is for, you have to be hungry for success. If coming from Google or Facebook, you probably have a lot of money. You're well compensated. You have great work-life balance. And I had many cases that I used to call to people in the middle of the work, and they're in the gym, or they're not really working that hard, or they're asking about like perks or benefits that only those FAANG companies offer. They really care about the benefits and the compensation, less about the actual work. They're not that hungry. So personally, I didn't have any good experience with hiring people from FAANG as well. The opposite, I would say, like my superstar engineers or superstar recruits are people who came from unknown companies, government positions, like army, like places that like you will not think about as a potential good source for recruitment.
Yeah, we've seen quite the opposite with a number of startups that we've worked with that are hiring. They want to see engineers that come from FAANG environments, and I would say that there's 2 ways of looking at it, right? You can look at from a soft skill perspective of just the person themselves, like are they willing to take risk? Are they able to adapt into a fast changing environment and get pulled into different lanes that maybe their job description wasn't all centered around. But there is credibility too of, there's an argument that, these are companies that hire engineers that are training under some of the best, technologists that have been in the industry. And they want that knowledge brought in because they maybe don't have it. Or there could just be the need for like a press release hire, right? Where it's like, hey, we want our head of engineering to come from company X because we need a round of funding soon, and they're gonna see that and say, wow, look at this comes with a network, this comes with other things tied to it. So we've seen it 2 ways, but I always think it's interesting in terms of breaking it down by role and department too, and seeing like, is there really is there a theme here? But that's just kind of what I've seen from.
Yeah, I think it really comes to social proof, right? Like saying, hey, like we have people come from Google or Facebook, like it helps maybe showing you in some light, right? And I think as a founder or as a recruiter, it just save you the extra work of figure out if this person is good or not, right? Like because they were hired by Google, it's probably they are above the bar for Google at least, so they should be in some bar for you, right? So it's gonna save you the work to validate a lot of those assumptions by having like outsourcing it to Google or to Facebook or other companies who already hire them. It's pretty much the same as social proof of like hiring people from Ivy League. Oh, they're good enough for Harvard, so they might be good enough for me. So yes, it's kind of a shortcut that you're taking, and I took that shortcut, but just my experience was not that good.
Yeah, I think so. You're an engineering founder, right?
Yes,
yeah. So that probably is a reason that you can evaluate engineers pretty well. So you don't necessarily need to take that shortcut. And I have an engineering co-founder as well, so we kind of don't have to go that route as well. But it definitely makes it easier. You know, it's a known quantity what you're going to get from a Google or a Facebook. They've done all the hard work of recruiting and hiring and everything. But it's kind of like overpaying for a commodity, right? You're going to it's a really, the fact that they come with a badge and a stamp is a really great thing, because you know that what you're getting, but you also everyone else knows what you're getting too. And if you can find pockets where you can find people that might not be known, you can help them elevate their careers too. Yeah. So it's kind of win-win.
What about from a culture perspective, right? Because I think Google is well known for, you know, a specific culture, and I'm Facebook, Amazon. I've only heard through the grapevine, but you know, I've talked to a lot of folks that originally coming from Amazon have expressed extreme burnout. You know, and so I've seen that flip flop where it's like, you know, if you want cush stable and 9 to 5, like, you know, maybe FAANG, well, you can't bank it all into FAANG, but startup, you know, you're going to need to be used to like long hours. But I've seen the flip side of that too with big companies where they will kind of work you to the bone. But from a culture perspective, were there things that you saw that you felt you know, really created this environment where people felt like, you know, like they were part of something bigger? I think it's easy in startup land to get folks really driven behind the mission of what you're building. You know, these larger tech companies are obviously, you know, impacting massive projects across different spectrums. But you know, I would say startups maybe have a little bit better of an opportunity of crafting their own specific type of culture. But were there things that you picked up that you carried into your own venture?
Yeah, I think,
and it could be things that you didn't want to bring to.
So for sure, I thought that, you know, you can make your own way. You can make your own destiny at a FAANG company. You can go the route where you're kind of sitting on your laurels and having a great time. And if you really want to be career driven, there's a lot of career driven people. You kind of have to show the metrics that they're looking at and make sure that you're going to put those forward. So there is, I think that you actually do have to do work if you want to, you know, do something and really go advance, which is important, because, you know, they're all that, you know, there's a huge pay scale difference between the top and the bottom within a FAANG as well. So if you're interested in that, you have to kind of optimize towards it. I think that you can also have a mission driven environment within one if you find the right team. My experience is that there are lots of sub teams and they have their own different culture. And I think that's probably the case with maybe all FAANGs except for Amazon, probably, which is really, you know, dictated on how everything works. But yeah, with my experience at Google, at least, I was able to find a really nice sub team, which was lots of fun to be a part of. We had a mission. We were able to keep that mission for a while. The issue for us was when we hit $1 billion in revenue on that sub team. And once that happened, it was like everyone came in and wanted to be a part of it because they could see that this was like one of the newer big things. And that's when the politics came in that I was kind of talking about earlier. So it was great until that happened.
I want to jump in on the politics thing because, Tim, what you're talking about, and Sagiv, I do want to give you a chance to talk, but at the same time, I think what leads to a lot of burnout, what I've seen, I don't think it has to do with the startup and the long hours. It's the politics. Like that's what creates a lot more burnout in my mind. Is like, as an engineer, I don't mind working long hours if I'm working on something I'm enjoying doing and I see the impact that I'm having. It doesn't even feel like I'm working. I'm just solving problems and getting shit done. Where I've seen the most burnout has more to do with all of the stuff that's going around it. And so I don't know that burnout is something that you have to worry about exclusively at startups or exclusively at a large company. I think it's really based on the environment and how frustrating it is to get something done. That's, and I'm curious, Saqib, Dave, what you thought, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that the terms work-life balance, everybody like define it differently, right? I saw people who got burned out working 9 to 5 with massage chair, right? Like, do you call it a bad work-life balance? I have no idea, right? And I worked with amazing people in startups that work like, I don't know, 12, 14 hours a day, and they felt energized and happy, and they couldn't feel better than that, right? So like a lot of people, especially in FAANG, work-life balance is a synonym for like how long you work. But I really don't see a connection between how long you work and how it actually affects your work-life balance, right? So I think the question is like, do you enjoy working on whatever you're working, right? Because if you are, you'll be fine no matter how long you're going to work on it. And the opposite, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, once the clock hit 5 o'clock, like even if it's 5:01, you'll feel dragged, right? So like, ask yourself, are you enjoying working on whatever you're doing? I usually tend to see people who work in startups really enjoying that. Otherwise, they will not be there, right? So they really don't pay attention to the clock. Versus people in FAANG, just they're mercenaries, right? Like they're here for the 9 to 5. And if you ask them to stay a minute longer, they will feel bad.
Well, I'll say mercenary doesn't last long in a startup either. They're usually one of the first ones identified as just not getting stuff done or whatever it is. It's just, or the value prop just isn't there. So I think there's also that aspect of it as well.
Yeah. The mercenary versus missionary, right? We always talk about it. And I think a better approach would be like, are you a pirate or you want to join the Navy, right? Like each one has different skill sets. Each one like enjoy doing other stuff. If you like to jump between ships and kind of be creative, go be a pirate, right? Like rob some ships. If you like want the process and the uniforms, go join the Navy.
I like that analogy. I might have to steal that.
True pirate. I'm curious, just when you talked about, obviously we break down like different projects that you work on in these big FAANG environments. Saqib, did you have a chance to kind of determine the type of project that you wanted to work on when you're going through the interview process with some of those companies, or you interviewed for a slot and there was a designated project? I'm curious on how that worked.
Yeah, so maybe that's a tip that I can give for the future founders here who want to join FAANG. Like when I joined FAANG, I already knew that I'm going to start my own company right after, right? So I just joined to learn how big companies operate. So for instance, when I joined Amazon, they offered me a few teams, right? And the way I evaluated which team I want to join to is I asked myself which team will give me the most benefits when I start my own company. So for instance, one of the teams that I ended up joining to is super relevant to the company that I started later on, right? So like, even when I joined, I already knew the company that I want to start and I chose my team based on that. So if you already know you want to start your own company, try to kind of navigate your career or the teams you're going to be working at based on that. So for instance, you're super passionate about whatever, machine learning. Try to get to one of those machine learning teams in one of the FAANG companies. If you're passionate about consumer-facing apps, try to use Instagram or whatever, like join the consumer-facing teams. So ask yourself what you're passionate about or what company you want to start one day. Maybe try to navigate your way inside those organizations to one of those.
That's really, really good intel. I one of the other founders that we spoke to had some exposure to a specific 0 to 1 kind of project where within Uber or what have you, and that was super valuable experience when starting his next thing, because hadn't really had that exposure before, but you kind of got the guardrails of working in a big environment, and the cushion of stability, even though you had a sandbox to play in for this 0 to 1 experiment. And so I think that was, kind of when you're explaining that, that's the type of stuff that I would say, like, yeah, if I'm looking to be a founder at some point, I want that experience specifically, and I'm going to negotiate to try to identify that type of a project within a bigger company. Really creative. Cool. All right. Well, I think that's probably going to wrap up the main topic for today, but we do have the community wheel behind us that we spin out here to get some additional kind of career growth questions going from topics that are crowdsourced from our Hatchpad community. So I'm going to give it a spin here and see what we land on.
Let's round it out.
Compensation. Fitting. All right. Let's see here. This kind of plays into what we're talking about with regards to, look, a startup isn't going to be your spot here to match up base for base in comparison to a FAANG comp. So what is it, as founders that you all bring to the table when you're negotiating comp with somebody who's clearly coming in at a range that's beyond what you have slotted? What are those benefits that you propose when you're negotiating comp? Steve, why don't you want to kick it off?
Sure. So I think you will, like, if you try to compete with the Facebook and Amazon of the world, like, you will run out of funding very soon, right? So, like, don't even try. So then ask yourself, what is your competitive advantage over that? Because at the end of the day, it comes. I'm going back to the same kind of point, but like, at the end, it comes to the motivation of who you want to join to your company. If you want them to join just for the comps, you probably don't want them to join, because the second they will get a better offer, they will move somewhere else, or they will probably not feel compensated enough, right? Because they can get probably more in FAANG. So I think your advantage or your leverage is one on the equity side, right? Stock options or whatever you want to offer them. You want to offer them the success and the upside that probably FAANG cannot. Obviously, there is a lot of risk with that, but the upside is much larger than whatever you can get with established IPO company, right? So that's one thing. And I think I don't want to put it under comp, but I will put it on like benefits that startups can offer that big companies cannot, which is, again, the growth, the learning opportunities, the dealing with whatever you're actually passionate about versus being slotted to a specific role, right? So I think, like, when people are really passionate and motivated by that, they will be a great fit for startups, right? If they're only come for the comps, they would probably leave really soon.
That's pretty aligned with what I would say, but I think I'd also suggest that people who come to a startup are kind of coming for the founders at some level, at least at the stage that we're at. And I think that's something that you can kind of sell. You can sell not just the company, but where we're going. And in addition to that, so that's obviously selling the equity. But in addition to that, I think that it's really important for us to be able to help them grow if they have ambitions to be a startup founder at some point in their life. So there's a lot of lessons that you can learn from just on the reciprocal of joining a FAANG to learn lessons so that you can start a startup. You should also join a startup to learn lessons to join a startup. Mm-hmm. And those things are like equity-based lessons. How do you actually hire talent? How do you with the restrictions that you actually have being a startup, you need to learn how to be strategic in your space. You don't have unlimited money. How do you, unlike the FAANGs, prioritize customer experience and prioritize customer growth and really be customer oriented. So a lot of those lessons I think you can learn uniquely at a startup.
I was just gonna say, I think because you can't win on compensation. So obviously you're not really talking about, come here to make a lot of money. Maybe options, do this, do that. I usually focus really on agency, right? Like, we're a startup. I only have so many people. You're going to be a substantial percentage of the team. I'm going to rely on you to make decisions. I'm going to rely on you to, whatever level, you're going to have a lot more freedom and a lot of ability to decide to make those decisions. And I think that if that's something that's attractive to somebody, like it's one of those, like it's a self-selector. If that scares you, then maybe this isn't the right opportunity. If you want to come in and be told what to do every day, don't come work for me. But if you want to come in and me tell you, like, I don't know, we need to go take that hill, you figure it out, and that's exciting to you, like, that's awesome. And that's the type of person I want to work with. And I think that those types of conversations, it's really about like that more than compensation specifically, because you're never going to win on money.
Yeah. And once someone experiences that, it's kind of addictive, right? Being able to make decisions yourself and not have to run them up to 10 people.
And get sign off from 3 other people who you're not even sure why they're weighing in on this decision.
And I'll kind of throw out the elephant in the room. The remote work has completely disrupted, access to talent that, most companies never had access to before. And, we have seen a shift in startups trying to figure out, how to best, roll out hybrid remote work, right? Because there's everybody's kind of got their own definition of it. But the reality is, the more that companies do require their employees to be in office, and I would say specifically engineers here at this point, there's a huge kickback on it. We see it every day that we talk to engineers that are considering opportunities, and each day that you add into the week that's coming into the office is one more ding against you in terms of, they've already gone the full, remote philosophy, right? So they've experienced it, and to have it to go back has been a real big challenge that we've seen for hiring specifically. And so using that as a carrot, and coming up with creative ways to still try to get folks together, if that's through retreats or if it's through, some sort of a satellite office that they can bounce to and you can meet with them. That's going to be something that you'll be able to leverage over comp, because that goes back into that work-life balance of now this is how folks have adapted to a new lifestyle. To change it these days, it's really challenging. So I'd say that's one that we always hear or we recommend, is trying to keep that as an outlet when you're negotiating. So, but that's pretty much all we got, guys. Anything closing statements you want to give, or also this is a good outlet to, if you want to promote any areas on social, or if you all are specifically hiring yourselves, go ahead and shout it out now, and then we can kind of wrap.
Sure, I'll go first. So yeah, thanks for having me. This has been a fun conversation.
For sure.
As far as hiring goes, we are actively hiring. We're actively hiring remote positions for developer relations and engineering mostly. So we're definitely looking for good and talented engineers.
Good stuff.
Yeah, just we're hiring as well. Go to liblab.com. You'll find me. You'll find the positions that we have available, mostly engineers or technical fields. In terms of last tip, I would say if you do want to start a startup one day, when you go to a FAANG company, try to be a manager. Because starting a company requires management skills, and you can be an amazing engineer, you can be an amazing product manager, or whatever IC role you started at. But you have to learn how to manage other people. And you probably don't want to learn it when you start your first company, right? If you can learn it in someone else's dime, that's much better. So I will highly suggest get some management experience before you start a company. That's my last tip for today.
Yeah, well said. Thanks again, guys, for joining us. It's been a good time.
Thank you.
Thanks.